Romans was the sixth epistle that Paul had written. It is placed first in the New Testament because it's his longest work and because it creates a perfect framework for the entire collection of his epistles. The theme of the book of Romans centers on the gospel of Christ. Romans has also been described as an exposition of the Old Testament in view of the gospel of Christ. So the book of Romans is about Jesus and the gospel of Jesus. We know that the word gospel means good news. So the book of Romans is about the good news of Christ and what it means practically for those who believe in the name of Jesus. How many of you bought a new car recently? Like in the last year or two? Naomi?
My parents did.
I thought your parents did. Okay. Anybody bought a brand new car recently? Okay. Cars have changed so much in the last 10 years. It's just crazy. I look at my truck. I've got a 2006 Nissan, and it was, when I bought it brand new off the showroom floor. And it was like really nice, and it had like all the bells and whistles. But I look at the cars that are coming out these days compared to my truck. It doesn't have a backup camera, which apparently you have to have. Amy tells me you have to have a backup camera. It doesn't have a backup camera. It has no way to connect my phone to be able to play music through the stereo system. So you look at the new cars, they come with this instruction manual. Mine has an instruction manual, it's probably like this. The newer car's instruction manual has to include all of this information because there's so much new stuff that comes with a new car. It brakes on its own. It stays in the lane by itself. You have backup cameras. It has all these instructions on how to connect your phone. You got all this navigation type stuff. So you have an instruction manual that describes everything that this new car does. And inevitably, when you buy a new car, you can read through it, but you're going to drive the car, get in the car, go to wherever you need to go, and it may be a year or two down the road, but there's going to be a day where you discovered that your car does something that you didn't even know that it did. Like, I didn't realize this car did this. And you've got this instruction manual. It details line by line everything that your car does. And what in turn you now have access to because you purchased this new car. Okay? The book of Romans is Paul writing to the church at Rome with an instruction manual of this is what you now have access to. And this is what it means for you. Because I can get into a brand new car and I can drive. Yes, it drives. It gets me from point A to point B. But if I don't have an understanding of everything that car will do, then I have limited access to all that car affords me, not because it can't do it, but because I don't have an understanding and a knowledge of what it can do. So Paul's writing this letter to the church at Rome because he wants them to have an understanding of what it means to believe in Jesus. And everything that comes with that, all the benefits, all the blessings, everything that comes with being a believer in Jesus Christ. So the central theme of the book of Romans is the gospel of Jesus, described as an exposition of the Old Testament in view of the gospel of Christ. So because of where we were born and the time frame of which we were born, we read the Old Testament, but we read the Old Testament through the prism or through the lens of Jesus. Because Jesus came after that, we're all been born after Jesus came. So even when we read the Old Testament, we read it from a perspective of we know where this is headed. It's headed to Jesus. So this is for the Romans and for Paul. This is, I want you to view the Old Testament now that we have Jesus and God has come in the form of his Son and has given us himself, has died on Calvary's cross, has resurrected, ascended back to the Father. Now that we have that, this is a lens through which we're going to view everything in the future. And this is now what you have access to because Jesus changed everything. That's why I've said and continue to say, all I'm going to preach is Jesus because Jesus is all I have to preach. So the good news, the gospel of Christ, is the center of the book of Romans. It's the central thing. Paul starts off the first chapter of the book of Romans with a statement of who he is and the origination of his calling. This establishes the authority with which he writes and the purpose of his ministry. He is a bondservant to Jesus and is set apart for the gospel. Jesus is going to be the prism through which all of Paul's epistles must be viewed and the center of everything that he is going to teach and instruct. In verses 3 through 5, Paul establishes the originations of Jesus. He was a Jew by birth, the line of King David, but the gospel, because of the grace of God, is now relevant and pertinent to not only Jews, but also to Gentiles. By tying the two groups together, he creates a bond of unity for God to work and sets the framework for a later manifestation that now in God's eyes there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. Okay? You can get back to the illustration of a car. You go and buy a new car. But what do you have to buy the new car? Credit, or you have to have money. Okay? I can go into a dealership and I can look at a brand new car and I can go, that's really nice. But then I can look at my bank account and go, this isn't going to work. Okay? Even though I recognize that new car is nice, it's not for me because I don't have the money to be able to purchase it. If I don't have the money to be able to purchase it. So what Paul is doing by tying the Jews and the Gentiles together is he's saying that Jesus is for you. Jesus is for the Jews. Jesus is for the Gentiles. And it creates a space for connection and community by tying the two groups together. And Paul will go on to say, now in God's eyes, there's no difference between Jew and Gentile because the gospel of Jesus Christ is for everyone. So I look at Jesus, and it does not matter if I'm a Jew, it does not matter if I'm a Gentile, he is for me. Because he has given himself for me. So by tying these two groups together, Paul creates a space for unity and the coming together of both Jews and Gentiles. In verse 8, Paul references what has been said about the church throughout the whole world. The faith of the Romans was so strong that it was talked about everywhere. Paul says it specifically this. It says, in verse 8, first I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. Their faith, what is faith?
What we perceive from God by grace.
What we perceive of God by grace. And we've come up with several different definitions of faith. Believing without seeing. Okay? Their faith was so strong that it was being talked about in the whole world. So that's who he's writing to. A group of people whose faith was so strong that it was being discussed everywhere. And Paul gives them commendation for this. Paul then goes on to say that it is his desire to be together with them physically, as they are already tied together spiritually. He then goes on to explain why he wants to be with them. Their faith is an encouragement to him, and his faith is an encouragement to them. By this statement, Paul establishes the importance of fellowship one with another. God has purposed us not to live alone, but in community of believers, so that we are corporately together, we are also corporately encouraged. So Paul says, I want to be with you. And the reason he wanted to be with them is he knew that when he was with them, he was going to be encouraged. And that when he was with them, they were going to be encouraged. That's why the Bible talks so much about assembling ourselves, coming together, because God's purposed us to walk and to live in community, in relationship with other believers. The elders get together once a month and meet, Ken and Wade now. And I look forward to that coming together because as we come together, I'll speak for myself, I'm encouraged. They provide an encouragement that I would not experience if we didn't meet. This community, this fellowship of believers, Crossroads Church, I can't wait to get here on Sunday. Because I know that God's given me something to say, but because I know that I'm not going to walk away from here when we leave here, or I leave from here when we're done. I'm going to walk away encouraged. And I pray that you walk away encouraged as well. Because there's a strengthening, there's a power, and there's an encouragement that comes when we get together. Okay, so that's what Paul's saying. I want to come to you. Because if I come to you, I'm going to be encouraged, and you're going to be encouraged. So as we continue to be together, there's an encouragement that comes. We spoke a little bit, or Amy and I spoke a little bit in the 10 o'clock Bible study hour. For those of you that weren't here, Amy and I had an adopted son, Edmund, who is older than Justin. He will turn 25 in November. And he grew up in very difficult situations, very difficult circumstances. Grew up in and out of foster care. We didn't meet him until he was 14, and he had been through a lot. His biological mother did not provide to take care of him. He had to scramble around to try to find food. He had to sleep on floors. He never had a bed. When he came to us, he had never had a bed. 14 years old and never had his own bed. And so there were challenges that were brought about by the past that he had to deal with. And the last few years, he has chosen not to have a relationship with us. Not our choice, but his. And we haven't spoken to him until this week, since January of last year, because he's chosen not to speak with us. Well, we found out on Monday that his girlfriend, who he had been dating, was pregnant. And then on Thursday, this little baby was born. So this week has been a whirlwind for us, because we found out on Monday we were going to be grandparents. And then on Thursday, the baby is here. Usually, you have 9 months to get ready for these things. And we didn't have 9 months to get ready. And on Thursday, Ann and I were talking after the baby was born. We went and saw the baby. Held the baby. She's a beautiful little girl named Paisley Lee. And I told Amy, I said, we need to contact her. I need to contact the elders and leadership and let them know what's going on. So I sent an email, because it's easier to email a pretty significant group of people than it is to try to have this long text to try to tell people what are going on. So I explained the situation, and I got encouragement back of knowing that I have a family and a community and this church that loves Amy and I, that cares for Amy and I. And Billy sent me a text personally. As soon as he sent it, I read it, and I was encouraged. Because I know that God's plan for Edmund was not for him to engage in sex outside of marriage and to conceive a baby. That his word is clear what his plan for us is. But I get a text from Billy after I respond, and I'm Billy, I hope you're okay, but I'm just going to read what you texted me. Because this is what Paul is writing about this community. Billy sent me this text on Friday. It said, Scott, praise God for your new granddaughter. God is good. We will pray for you and your family. We love you both and pray God's blessings on your oldest son, his friend, his girlfriend, and your new granddaughter. We give God the glory. Love you, brother. So here Amy and I are walking through this, and I've got a brother who shares encouragement, because it's difficult. It's not the plan that we wanted for our son. It's difficult. It has broken our heart because our son has chosen not to have a relationship with us and not to speak with us. And now in a few days, we go from we don't know where he is, we don't know what he's doing, to okay, well now we know what he is, we know what he's doing, and now there's this little baby. And Amy and I were having dinner Friday night, and I made the statement to her. I said, it very well may be that God matched us up with Edmund because he knew that we needed to be this little girl's grandparents. Because we're going to have a relationship with this girl for her whole life. Whether our son chooses to have a relationship with us moving forward, we're going to have a relationship with this little girl. But the community that we have at Crossroads Church that is loving us and is caring for us and encouraging us, this is what God's called us to do, to encourage one another, to live and walk in community. And this is why Paul says, I want to come to you. Because if I come to you, I'm going to be encouraged. And if you come, and when I come to you, you're going to be encouraged. Because this is God's plan for us, to live and walk in community. Paul was eager to preach the gospel to them so that they might be edified, comforted, and encouraged. In verse 16, Paul starts to transition into what he is going to discuss in the rest of the chapter. He says this, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." For Paul to make this statement leads us to believe that despite the fact that others were ashamed, that he wasn't. He would own it because God owned him. And he goes on to say why he isn't ashamed. The gospel is God's plan for salvation through Jesus for both Jew and Gentile. He isn't ashamed because it's the very plan for the one he is completely indebted to. It says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus." And he makes that statement. And what he does is create a framework for everything else that he's going to say. So if he says that he's not ashamed of the gospel, that means that there has to be other people that were ashamed of the gospel. He says, "I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed of God's plan." Even though God's plan meant that he was going to come and that Jesus was going to die, and the core central tenet of our faith starts with murder and crucifixion, I'm not ashamed of that. Because God has anointed that, and this is his plan for salvation. And that plan is Jesus, his death, burial, and resurrection. And I'm not ashamed of that. So much that I'm not ashamed that everything else that I'm going to say is going to go right back to Jesus, because I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus, because it's God's plan for salvation. And his willingness to say, "I'm not ashamed." If he would have been ashamed, he can just stop this letter because he's got nothing else to say. Because Jesus says, "I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." So if he's going to be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus, we'll just stop the letter there because he doesn't have anything else to say because there's no way to get to the Father and he's ashamed of the gospel. But he's saying, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel." Yes, it was awful. Yes, it was brutal. Yes, it was torturous. But I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus because it's God's plan. And I'm a bondservant of Jesus. He gave everything for me. Now I'm going to give my whole life for him. I'm not ashamed of what he did for me, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm a bondservant of Jesus Christ, because this is God's plan for salvation. And I want to make you aware of this. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. And nor can we be. As God's called us to be light in Cairo, Thomasville, and Tallahassee. We cannot be silent. We cannot be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. Because we're living in a day and an age where people need it desperately. My son needs the gospel of Jesus. He does. My new granddaughter needs the gospel of Jesus. We cannot be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. Paul wasn't, nor can we. In verse 16, Paul starts a transition into what he's going to discuss in the rest of the chapter. Verse 17. He further illustrates that the righteousness of God is only accessible through the gospel, and it requires faith as a means of impartation. In essence, I'm not ashamed because it's the only way for me to get to God. Paul will then lay out God's charge against the unrighteous and the glory of the gospel. We are all unrighteous, and God must punish unrighteousness. We are all going to appear before God, and the gospel is the only way to appear righteous. The rest of the first chapter is going to address the nature of unrighteousness and the outcome for those who choose to live in this manner. So he addresses those that God has given over to a depraved or reprobate mind. Says this, even though they knew God, they chose to set up other deities, other things in his place. Because of their knowledge of God, their response should have been worship, but their response was to turn away with a hardened heart and worship that which was temporal over that which was eternal. This reveals the nature of unrighteousness. It seeks its own. It desires to elevate flesh. It refuses to worship that which is righteous. This also reveals to us our complete need and dependence upon Jesus Christ. We have access to his righteousness, but only when we bring our unrighteousness to him in every area of our lives and crucified at the very same altar at which he was crucified. Paul goes on to say this, verse 25. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. How many of you have been to New York before? How many of you have ever seen the New York Stock Exchange? Anybody ever gone in that? Wall Street, New York Stock Exchange. What is the New York Stock Exchange? Capitalism. Okay? It's capitalism. New York Stock Exchange. What goes on at the New York Stock Exchange?
Corruption.
Oh. Trading stocks. That's what we're getting
Same
at.
thing.
Thanks for hijacking it, Greg. It's all good. Trading of stocks. There's an interaction. There's a trading of stocks. Or an exchange. Kind of like Christmas time. There's an exchange. We say you exchange gifts. When you go to New York Stock Exchange, you're hoping that you're going to exchange something and it's a good exchange for you. We make exchanges all the time. Most of us make exchanges every day. If you go to Publix and buy sub, you're making an exchange. You're exchanging however much that sub is for the sub. And you choose to make that exchange. When we leave here, we're going to go eat lunch. We're going to make another exchange. We're going to go exchange our money and hand it over to wherever we go to lunch, and they're going to give us back food. We're making an exchange. And in essence, saying that I'm willing to exchange what I have, this tangible asset, for what you can provide me in the form of food. And we readily make these exchanges all day. Paul describes an exchange. And this is the exchange he describes. For they exchange the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. This is not an exchange that God desires for us to make, but it's an exchange that a lot of us make frequently. We exchange the truth of God for a lie. What does this look like in our lives when we do this? When we exchange the truth of God for a lie. Divorce. Could be low self-esteem. We hear the voice of the enemy that says we don't amount to anything, and that there's nothing in us that's good. When we believe that, we are exchanging the truth of God for a lie. And this is not God's plan for us. As His righteousness, as the very righteousness of Jesus given to us, that we aren't exchanging the truth of God for a lie. But we do this in our lives. When we believe something about ourselves that's not true, we exchange the truth of God. Now get this. Understand, for us to exchange the truth of God, what do we have to possess? Get this, because it'll change you if you understand this. In order to exchange the truth of God for a lie, what do you have to have ownership of? The truth of God. So we have the truth of God. Who is who? Jesus. And we choose to exchange the truth of God, something as precious as His Son, to exchange the truth of God for a lie. And yet when we believe something that is false, and we believe something that does not line up with the foundational word, foundational truth of what the Word of God says, we exchange the truth of God for a lie. And worship the creature rather than the Creator. And what Paul is saying is that God doesn't desire for us to walk in unrighteousness. When unrighteousness manifests, He desires for us to confess it, to give it to Him, and then to in turn walk in His righteousness. But the enemy would love nothing more than for us to exchange the truth of God for a lie. Because when we exchange the truth of God for a lie, what do we possess then? A lie. And we appropriate that as truth in our life. And it doesn't work. It's the equivalent of me going out to my truck and putting water in it and expecting it to run. I go and put water in, crank it up, and it doesn't run. And I go, well, I don't understand why my car's not running. It wasn't purposed to run on water. It was purposed to run on gas. We're not purposed to run on the lie that the enemy tries to sell us. We're purposed to run on the foundational truth of the Word of God. And when we appropriate a lie as truth in our life, it's the same as trying to put water in a car expecting it to work. And it doesn't. So what we have to do is we have to hold on to the truth of who we are in Christ. And that's what Paul is building in this first chapter of Romans. And that do not exchange the truth of God for a lie. Because the truth of God will allow you to build your whole life on Jesus as the center. And your life will be run and glorified to God exactly the way that He intended and purposed it from the very beginning. Or they exchange the truth of God for a lie and worship that which was created over the Creator. It is vital in the life of a believer to center our lives around the truth of God in every aspect of our lives. We must fight against trading the truth of God for a lie in everything. Paul then documents, and we'll close with this. Paul then documents some of the characteristics of those who exchange the truth of God for a lie. Passion and lust that don't line up with the Word of God. Unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossipers, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. These are manifestations of unrighteousness and manifestations of what happens when we exchange the truth of God for a lie and walk in unrighteousness. If these are signs of unrighteousness, then their opposite must be true. This is what the life of one who clings to the Word of God, who clings to the truth of God, and who takes and appropriates the righteousness of Jesus in their life, and who loves God and chooses to walk according to His precepts, to walk according to His Word. If those are signs or manifestations of unrighteousness, then their antonyms must be the characteristics of righteousness. So when we look at the unrighteousness, let's flip it on its side and understand that these are the manifestations of a life lived in the truth of God. Virtuous, generous, good, content, life, peace, integrity, benevolence, silence, praise, lovers of God, respectful, humble, modest, inventors of good, honoring of parents, wise, trustworthy, loving, and merciful. These are the manifestations and the characteristics of righteousness. And these are what should be flowing from every part of who we are if we're walking in the righteousness of who Jesus Christ is, and in turn, walking in His righteousness, it becomes who we are. These are the characteristics that should be and must be flowing in our hearts and in our lives when we are walking and appropriating the righteousness of Jesus. I want to read this list again and we'll close with it. Virtuous, generous, good, content, life, peace, honesty, benevolence, silence, praise, lovers of God, respectful, humble, modest, inventors of good, honoring the parents, wise, trustworthy, loving, and merciful. As Paul establishes in chapter 1, this is what God wants from you. This is who Jesus is. This is in turn who you are. And this is His plan.